The US national debt is rocketing toward $40 trillion. If you started counting in right now, $1 every second, you wouldn't be done for over a million years. But this isn't just some abstract number, it's a ticking time bomb aimed directly at your mortgage, your retirement, and the money in your pocket. In this video, I'm going to break down the invincible force driving this crisis and what really happens when the bill for decades of overspending finally comes due. But to get the picture, you first have to wrap your head around the sheer size of this number. As of late 2025, the US national debt has blown past a mind-boggling $38 trillion. To put that in perspective, this number is bigger than the entire American economy. That's every single thing America make and do in a year. The debt to GDP ratio, which is like a country's credit score, has shot up to over 120%. That's a level we haven't seen since America was paying off World War II. So what is national debt? Simply put, it's the grand total the federal government has borrowed over the years to cover its bills. Think of it like a national credit card that never gets paid off. Every year when the government spends more than it brings in from taxes, it runs a budget deficit. To cover the gap, the Treasury borrows money by selling bonds to investors both in America and overseas. Each deficit just gets piled onto the total debt. The last time the US actually ran a surplus and took in more money than it spent was way back in 2001. And we're not talking about a small overreach each year. For fiscal year 2025 alone, the deficit is projected to be around $1.8 trillion. The debt is growing at a shocking speed. Just over the past year, it jumped by more than $2 trillion. For a while during the government shutdown in October 2025, the debt was increasing by $192,000 every single second. That's more than 3 times the average American's yearly income added to the national tab every second of the day. It's also helpful to know that this debt comes in 2 flavors. First, there's debt held by the public. This is what the government owes to everyone who bought its bonds. You, me, pension funds, and even foreign countries like Japan and China. As of early 2025, this chunk was about $29 trillion. The second part is intragovernmental debt, which is about $7.4 trillion. This is money the government owes to itself. It's like borrowing from your 401k to pay your mortgage. For example, trust funds like Social Security have historically taken in more money than they've paid out. By law, that surplus cash gets invested in treasury bonds. So the government essentially borrows from Social Security savings to pay for other things today. It's a giant IOU from the government to its own future promises. For years, everyone treated this growing number like a problem for another day, but the math is getting ugly. The path America is on is unsustainable. The Non-Partisan Congressional Budget Office, or CBO, projects that the debt held by the public will surge from 99% of GDP in 2024 to 116% by 2034. Looking further out, it's projected to hit an astronomical 156% by 2025. And America is not kicking that down the road anymore. They are running out of road. So how did we get here? How did the richest country on earth end up under a $38 trillion mountain of IOUs? It wasn't one thing but a toxic mix of long-term trends, massive crisis, and politically gutless decisions that have been put off for decades. First, let's talk about the big predictable forces that add to the debt automatically. The 2 biggest culprits are an aging population and runaway healthcare costs. The huge baby boomer generation is now deep into retirement. Every single day, thousands more people turn 65 and start claiming Social Security and Medicare. People are also living longer, which is great, but it puts a huge strain on the budget. These programs are called mandatory spending for a reason. They run on autopilot. The government is legally required to pay the benefits, so as more people become eligible, the cost just keeps swelling. On top of that, the US healthcare is the most expensive in the world by a lot. Federal spending on Medicare and Medicaid is climbing way faster than the economy is growing, thanks to sky-high prices of medical care and drugs. Put these trends together and you have a structural problem. The promises the American government have made are way more expensive than the taxes it's set up to collect. Then a couple of huge crises threw gasoline on the fire. The 2008 financial crisis and the pandemic both led to trillions in emergency government spending. In 2008, it was stimulus packages to save the banks. During the pandemic, Congress pushed out trillions in relief checks, unemployment benefits, and business loans to stop a complete economic collapse. You can argue those actions were necessary. Debt always spikes during wars and recessions, but here's a difference. After these crises ended, the debt never went back down. Instead, those emergencies permanently jolted onto a much higher, much steeper debt path. And now we get to the most dangerous dangerous part of the whole mess. The debt is starting to feed on itself. This is the fuse on the time bomb, the interest payments. For years, the government could borrow for next to nothing, but as interest rates have gone up and as debt has ballooned, the cost to service that debt has exploded. In 2024, for the first time ever, the government spent more on interest payments than it did on national defense. It's now one of the biggest expenses in the entire budget. Over the next decade, the US is on track to spend a staggering $14 trillion just on interest. This creates a vicious cycle, a debt snowball. The government has to borrow more money just to pay the interest on the money it already borrowed. This new borrowing creates its own interest, making the debt grow faster and faster, even with no new spending at all. This is what makes the current situation so unstable. The entire global financial system is built on trust in America's ability to pay its debt. But what happens when that trust starts to crack? If investors start to worry that the debt is too big and the American politicians are too gridlocked to fix it, they will start demanding higher interest rates. A sudden spike in rates would send the debt snowball into an avalanche, possibly triggering a full-blown fiscal crisis. We are not there yet, but for the first time, projections show the US debt to GDP ratio is on track to blow past countries like Italy, a nation long seen as a symbol of financial instability. The alarm bells aren't ringing for some distant future anymore, they're ringing right now. Okay, a $38 trillion debt sounds bad for the government, but how does this number actually hit, your wallet and your future? Well, the consequences are real and they are personal. When this bill comes due, everyone will pay the price. I mean, let's just start with your money. A giant national debt can make it more expensive for you to borrow money. When the government is borrowing trillions, it's competing with everyone else for a limited supply of cash. This crowding out effect pushes up interest rates for everybody. That means your mortgage gets more expensive, your car loans cost more, your credit card rates go up. It also means businesses have to pay more to borrow, so they invest less, expand less, and hire fewer people. That leads to slower economic growth and fewer job opportunities for all of us. Next, get ready for a lovely choice: higher taxes or fewer services. A government drowning in debt only has two ways out: raise revenue or cut spending. Both hurt. Raising revenue really just means raising taxes. That could be higher income taxes, leaving you with a smaller paycheck, or it could be a new tax like a national sales tax that make everything you buy more expensive. There's no magic wand here. Paying for this debt means the money has to come from somewhere. The other option is cut spending, but when you look at the budget, you see how hard that is. About 3/4 of all federal spending is on autopilot for things like Social Security, Medicare, and interest on the debt. Cutting those would start a political civil war. The rest of the budget, discretionary spending, is everything else. The military, roads, bridges, scientific research, national parks. As interest payments eat up more and more of the pie, they will inevitably squeeze out funding for everything else. That means less investments in the very things that drive our future economy. This all leads to the most serious consequence. We are stealing from future generations. A debt this big is just a way for us to pay for our current spending by borrowing from our kids and grandkids. They are the ones who will inherit a country with a crushing financial burden, a lower standard of living, and a future where they're forced to make the truly painful choices: sky-high taxes or gutted government service. And finally, there's the risk of a true fiscal crisis. We've seen previews of these during the debt ceiling showdowns. A government shutdown can disrupt payments to federal workers and even social security recipients. But a worst-case scenario, where the US actually defaults on its debt, would trigger a global financial meltdown. The dollar would crash, markets would collapse, and America would lose its role as the foundation of the world economy. While a default is still unlikely, the fact that it's even part of the conversation shows how unstable things have become. The path we're on leads to a future with higher costs, fewer opportunities, and more risk for every single American. After all this doom and gloom, you're probably asking yourself, can they fix this? Is there a way to defuse this big bomb? Well, the good news is that on paper, the solutions are actually pretty simple. The bad news is that they're all politically toxic, which is exactly how America got there in the first place. Fixing the debt means pulling three main levers: cutting spending, raising taxes, and boosting economic growth. I mean, first, cutting spending. To make any real difference, the cuts have to hit the main drivers: mandatory programs like Social Security and Medicare. Ideas that have been floated include gradually raising the retirement age, tweaking the formula for benefit increases, or making high earners pay more, but these programs are widely popular. They're called the third rail of American politics for a reason. Touch them and you die. So what about cutting discretionary spending? The problem is that this part of the budget is already shrinking compared to the economy, and it pays for things like military, veterans care, and medical research. You can't solve a multi-trillion-dollar problem by trimming a few billions from a fund for a new bridge. The second lever is raising taxes. Like spending cuts, there are a lot of ways to do it, and nobody likes any of them. Some ideas focus on raising taxes on corporations or for the wealthy, others want to get rid of popular tax deductions like the one for mortgage interest. A more extreme idea is a national consumption tax, which is common in Europe, but the second you mention raising taxes, you get an immediate backlash and a partisan screaming match over who should pay more. The third lever, the one all politicians love to talk about, is economic growth. The idea here is that if the economy grows fast enough, the tax revenues will go up automatically and the debt will shrink as a percentage of GDP. Policies to make this happen include cutting regulations and investing in technology and infrastructure. Growth is definitely part of the solution, but relying on it alone is a fantasy. CBO's scary projections already assume the economy will grow. For America to grow their way out of this, they need an economic boom, bigger and longer than anything most economists think is possible. So in the end, any real solution will have to be a mix of all three. And that gets to the real problem. This isn't an economic crisis, it's a political one. Solving debt requires long-term thinking, compromise, and a spine to make unpopular choices. But the political system is built for short-term wins and partisan warfare. Both parties love to use debt as a weapon against the other, but neither has shown any real courage to actually fix it. Now, if you found this breakdown helpful, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives into the forces shaping our world, and share this video, and let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video.